This video is brought to you in collaboration with WoWhead.com. Hello everyone! Patch 10.0.5 brings us a new Primal Storm event, which is called the Storm's Fury. Brewing within the Primalist future, their strongest forces are rallying to preserve their plans to dominate Azeroth. We need to gather our fellow adventurers to seal their portals and defeat their mighty monstrosities. Head into this alternate reality to earn ourselves some rewards, a timeline in which the Primalists have won. This did get me wondering, what exactly do we know about the Primalists so far, as the game hasn't given us a whole lot of story about them quite yet. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
The elements have granted me the power I need.
The Primalists, short and sweet, they're followers of the Incarnates. One interview even has them described as followers of Galagrond, but I haven't been able to find anything in-game to actually support this. To talk about the Incarnates and their view for life on Azeroth, we'll have to go back in time, all the way to, well, the beginning really, when the miraculous new world was taking shape. Deep within the world's core, the spirit of a mighty and noble titan stirred to life. Azeroth, it would one day be called. As the nascent titan developed, elemental spirits roamed across the world's surface. They ruled the planet, and they loved keeping it in constant chaos. The presence of the fifth element, which is called spirits, it affects the disposition of these elemental beings. If you have a world with an overabundance of spirits, they may give rise to native elementals who are passive and lack physicality. On the other hand, a world with too little spirits, they may birth elementals who are highly aggressive and incredibly destructive. Now, our growing world soul, it was so vast that it had drawn in and consumed much of the element of spirits. Without this primordial force to create balance, Azeroth's elemental spirits descended into chaos. Fire, earth, air, and water. These were the forces that lorded over our infant worlds, with four elemental lords, Ragnaros, Alakir, Pharazane, and Neptulon, powerful beings beyond mortal comprehension. They reigned supreme over innumerable lesser spirits. The elemental spirits appear in almost infinite variety of shapes and sizes. Each of these creatures has a distinct personality and temperament, traits that are heavily influenced by a spirit's elemental nature. A shaman can communicate with these elements, ask them, or bargain with them for their assistance. On the other side of things, we've all seen the elementals abandon mortals due to their actions. Just think back to the orcs embracing fell magic and abandoning the elements. It would be until the rise of Thrall, when the first orcs started to wield the elements again. So the elements and the elemental lords, they partied upon the surface of Azeroth, and life was good for them for a while. Yeah, it was a bit chaotic. They would fight each other. It was a bit primal, which was keeping that strife going. But they were free, as huge mountains were crashed upon by massive tidal waves. Tornadoes and firestorms were raging across the surface. The world was their domain. It was their playground, until the coming of the old gods. These creatures of the void had been sent out by the Void Lords across the universe, in the hopes of landing on planets which housed these titanic spirits inside to corrupt them. A lot of the old gods landed on empty planets, but a few of them would hit the jackpot, like the ones that crashed on Azeroth. After millennia of apocalyptic battles between the elemental lords, they now faced a new war, one against the so-called Black Empire. For the first time in Azeroth's history, the Elemental Lords pooled their powers together to get rid of this invading force. Yet for all their fervor, the Elementals could not topple the Black Empire. No matter how many of their forces were slain, more and more would spawn from the old gods' putrid forms, like larvae from a hive. They engulfed the lands like an unstoppable pestilence, shattering the Elementals' forms. In the end, the old gods enslaved the elementals and their lords. Perpetual twilight descended upon Azeroth, and the world, it spiraled into an abyss of suffering and death. Or so the history books tell us. Their freedom was taken away, as now it was the old gods that ruled the worlds. Not forever though. Azeroth would eventually be discovered by the Pantheon, other titans who were on a quest of waking up more of their kinds, in the process bring order to the universe. Whereas the brothers Sargeras thought that there was no saving worlds infected by the old gods. The Pantheon, they were not ready to give up quite yet. They went to work cleansing Azeroth, their phenomenal cosmic powers being so great that they could have simply ripped out the old gods and be done with it. But that would also do massive damage to that titan spirit inside. Instead, they decided to work a little bit more delicately through created keepers who would fight the war for them. The arrival of the Titan Forge caught the old gods completely off guard. They reeled in response to these stone and metal-skinned invaders, but they were determined not to lose control over Azeroth. To reassert their dominance, the old gods called upon their greatest lieutenants, the Elemental Lords. The enraged Elemental Lords and their minions beset the Titan Forge on all sides. Ever wary of fighting a unified elemental army, the Keepers resolved to divide and conquer their enemies, ultimately earning victory. And although the Elemental Lords had been defeated, the Keepers knew that they could not utterly destroy the beings. The spirits of the Elementals, they were bound to Azeroth itself. If they were killed, their corporal forms would simply manifest again in time. So instead, imprisonment was the way to go. 4 interlinked domains within a pocket dimension known as the Elemental Plane were created. The Elemental Lords and nearly all of their servants were banished to their own enchanted prison realms. Ragnaros was sent to the Firelands, Elekir to Skywall, Featherzane to Deepholm, and Neptulon to the Abyssal Maw. Then it was the old gods' turn to be defeated, as well as imprisoned. Some machines were put into place to help spirit inside of the planet grow. And with that, the Titan's job was done. Onwards they went to more adventures as the spirit would grow, leave behind the Keepers to keep an eye on the worlds. So, the elements moved from enslavement to the old gods to now banishment by the Titans. The domain of the Void wanted to control them, and so did the domain of Order. Not all of the elements were neatly locked away though. When the Keepers had sealed off the elemental plane, some stragglers had escaped the banishment. The fury of these spirits had ebbed over time, and they became creatures of flesh and blood. It was from these former elementals that some forms of wildlife, such as the proto-dragons, came to be. The origins of a Razakev, but also Alexstrasza and the others, that lies with the elements, which brings us a little bit closer to the story of Dragonflight. One of these evolved proto-dragons, known as Galagrond, they drank from the forbidden bathwater, evolved into a huge threat. At the Titan facility of Uldorus, or Tearhold as we call it, there are the Halls of Infusion. We read that the waters, with the eternal essence of Azeroth, they used to flow here, and that somehow the old god Yogg-Saron, they managed to compromise the living waters, which triggered the evolution of Galagrond into the monstrosity that was now puking up his own kind, spewing out necromancy, growing a whole bunch of eyes, until ultimately, the union of Keeper Tyr and the now dragon aspects, they managed to take him out. This opened Tyr's eyes to the idea that the world of Azeroth could always use more defenders than just the Keepers. Alexstrasza, Ysera, Neltharion, Malygos, and Nosdormu, they were empowered to be the first of dragonkind, with more proto-dragons to follow. In turn, those waters were now used by Tyr to infuse the dragons not with void magic like Yogg-Saron had done, but rather with order magic, to keep the dragons neatly aligned with the mindset of the Titans. So, similar how the surface of the world was taken from the elements by the void and then by the Titans, so too were these waters transformed in its purpose. One has to wonder if the dragons actually know about this, know that they've been manipulated even before they hatched.
We need not fight another war. There is still time to see reason.
Time is precisely what you stole from me. Thousands of years, rotting in that prison.
I failed then to restore peace between us. Too many paid for that.
Spare me your sanctimony. You forced the Titan's edict upon us all. You betrayed the world that gave us life. And when we dared resist, you cast us out.
Not all the proto-dragons embrace the will of the Titans though, and that's the root of the conflict that we see within Dragonflight. The history between the aspects, between the dragons, the Incarnates, and the Primalists.
And you think about what the Primalists were being driven by, they have a valid point. Their entire philosophy was just rooted in this idea that dragons should not be touched by outside influences. They should be free to be their own beings and not be changed by the magic of the Titans, for example. And that was a disagreement at first, and disagreements led to conflict, and conflict led to war. And what makes someone a villain is not necessarily the ideology they have all the time. Sometimes it can be the actions that they will take in service of that ideology. So with the Incarnates, even though they started in an understandable place, they've done some very nasty things throughout history. And we will learn more about that as the story unfolds. And we will see that they they started out with, again, those relatable intentions, but ended up in a place that the aspects really had to fight against them for the sake of preserving not only their own kingdom, but Azeroth as a whole.
Those chapters of history between the Primalists and the Dragons, they've not been transcribed. And so far, we've been getting little bits and pieces with details, but still a lot needs to be fully explained. We know that where the Dragons joined Team Titan, the Incarnates and the Primalists did not, and who can blame them? We've seen that Keeper Tyr was not opposed to experimenting with proto-dragons, trying to find a way to bring them in line. Perhaps it was Tyr who was responsible for giving Galagrond his necromantic powers, but regardless, no was not an acceptable answer to him. The might of the Incarnates was so great that not even the so-called empowered aspects were able to take him on. Neltharion had to rely on his mind-controlling gauntlet and Dragfear forces. Until those failed him, then he had to fall back on the powers of the old gods. In turn, the Incarnates have allied with the Jardin, and seeing how they were able to give the empowered aspects such a fight, you have to wonder where all of that power came from. Is this just what proto-dragons are capable of without the influence of order? Or did they too find their own sponsors to help them out? Like the Elemental Lords perhaps? Who knows?
Of the three that remain, Viranath and Farak were ever loyal to the Incarnate's ideals. But it was Iridikron who truly embraced the war. The last captured, and the most difficult to contain.
At the end, he struck terrible bargains to keep their cause alive. His violent desperation makes him dangerous. I believe the other Incarnates never knew the true depths of his depravity.
With those terrible bargains kept in the shadows, and the details of the war still unknown, all we can say for certain is that the Incarnates and the Primalists, they were a huge threat to the Dragons. So much so that 3 of them got their own prison balls within the vault of the Incarnates, and then Razagev, the youngest of them all, within the Froststone Vault at the Forbidden Reach. All of this took place over 20,000 years ago. And to the question,
if they were so dangerous, why were they not destroyed?
I hadn't the heart to do it. We were once as clutchmates.
The Queen of the Dragons had hoped that time would quell their fury, but instead, Razagev and their kind, they spent years followed, seething, burning for revenge. All that was unknown to the rest of the world, though. This history was kept between the dragons. No chronicles, no in-game books, not a hint or whisper of the Incarnates being out there. And yet, we see the Primalists, led by Kurok Grimtotem, instantly rise up and know exactly where to go. They know exactly what to do in order to unleash Razagev, which is interesting. Perhaps whatever surge of elemental power which awoke the Dragon Isles, it also gave her the power to communicate with Kurok, as she wasn't entirely cut off from the world.
The brood of Neltharion. I felt his demise reverberate through the earth, and reveled in it.
We also know that Kurok was once the prized pupil of Magatha Grimtotem. And Magatha is the murderer of Cairn Bloodhoof, but also a follower of the Farseer Durny Offensive Legion, and an incredibly powerful shaman in her own right. She has managed to not only manipulate heroes, but also the Twilight's Hammer. And last we saw of her was in the vicinity of the Doomstone. This is a magical device capable of absorbing and amplifying elemental power. That's been quite a while ago now. The world's been stabbed, it's been healed again, and we partied in the afterlife. Now we see the rise of the elements, and no Magatha to be found. Yet her students leads the way for the Primalists.
Mistress of the storm, the primal powers have risen to set you free.
After partying on the Forbidden Reach and liberating Razagev, they move out across the Dragon Isles. At the Waking Shores, they're busy infusing dragon eggs with primalistic might, and they're trying to stop the Black Dragonflight from depositing their eggs at the Ruby Life Pools, even going as far as infiltrating the pools with the aim of stealing their eggs and infusing them with their own powers. At the Unarmed Plains, they're led by the Night Elf Koralev, and they've teamed up with the Nokut Centaur to bring down the Green Dragonflight and gain entrance to the Emerald Dream, where sometime earlier, Tyrande, Malfurion and Marifra, they hid away a seed infused with the spirits of the fallen Keldori. Uncertain what the seed will grow into. Most likely a tree, but we don't know quite yet. Or uncertain what the Primalists wanted it for. Safe to say though that it holds great power. Corlif is slain at the end of the zone, leaving us to wonder what her story was, how she got to be with the Primalists. She has a scar on her face, perhaps one from the burning of Teldrassil. But as I said, we can only wonder. In the Azure span, they're after the magic wielders, those that throw around the powers of the domain of order, something the Primalists cannot abide. All of that came together at Vaktros, where Razageth herself tried to rip all the arcane magic out of the tower so that she could destroy it. We stopped there, and yet the storm still lurks around the place. Now I imagined that she wanted to destroy the tower to deal damage to all of the Azure span, and yet Caligos and the other aspects, they still wonder what else she could be after, considering the prison of her kin does not lie within the Azure span. Meaning that perhaps the tower is going to play a more significant role in the future. Then the infiltration in Veldraken and Teldrassus. Not just outside forces have made their way to the Dragon Isles to now team up with the Primalists. Right here we realize that those who've called the Isles home for millennia while the aspects were away, they do not rejoice at the return of the Titans' minions. They too want to see the Incarnates released. And they get the wish fulfilled. At the end of the Vault of the Incarnates, after pushing away through more primalistic forces, including Kurok Grimtotem himself, Razageth is defeated, but her siblings are set free.
Sister, what have they done to you? Her death demands vengeance. All who betrayed dragonkind to the Titans will face our wrath.
And that's pretty much where the story of the Primalists left us so far. And as you probably picked up by now, there are still a bunch of gaps in history left to be explained. At face value, things are pretty simple. The world of Azeroth, it has changed over the years, and the Primalists, they want to return to the days of old. The days in which the elements ruled the world. And yet the details, why certain characters want this to happen, what about the Elemental Lords, what about Magofa Grimtotem, what about the Shamans of the Earthen Ring, and what kicked all of this off, those details still need to be explained. And while I doubt that the Storm's Fury event is going to do so, I'm still hoping that somewhere in the future, we are getting that story. At the same time, there is an interesting discussion, an interesting point of view story being built up. While their methods might be questionable, there's definitely an argument to be made in the favor of the Primalists. From their point of view, from the elemental point of view, how much different has existence been between being enslaved to the will of the old gods and being shackled by the will of the Titans? More and more information is revealed, which shows that the Keepers don't always share everything that they know, like the advancements of the Black Empire being scrubbed from the history books. Dragons are being manipulated even before they're hatched. And do they know this? How do they feel about it? Somebody like Raffion, who was also planned to be used even before being hatched, they could potentially sympathize with the viewpoints of the Primalists. Now going fully back to the days in which the elements ruled the planets, that's doubtful. The world has evolved over the years, but perhaps a compromise can be found instead of just wiping out one force off the battlefield and the world keep on turning as it always has. But that's for future story though. I'm really hoping that we're going to get that in the future, but only time is going to tell. For now, you're up to speed on the story of the Primalists so far, so thank you very much for watching, everyone. Stay tuned for more details, or read up on all the things that we talked about today, then check out the related WoW article in the description down below. You could also subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and until next time, see ya!